The champagne glasses caught the light just right, expensive, fragile, and way too full of fake laughter. Washington dinners always felt like small wars dressed in velvet. Everyone came armed with smiles instead of bullets. I'd spent enough time in real wars to tell the difference. That night, the dinner was for Lockfield Industries, the defense contractor, where my sister, Claire Ward, had built her empire in high heels and politics. I was there as a courtesy, the family appearance. She'd insisted, "Tessa, you're part of this world too now," she'd said over the phone, which usually meant, "I want to remind you who runs it." My husband, Ethan, stood next to me, perfect tie, polite grin, the same man who once said he loved that I was a soldier because I got things done. Lately, that line had turned into a quiet resentment he couldn't hide. I ran Ward Defense Solutions, our company. He called himself co-founder, but I was the one writing the contracts at midnight and driving to bases in the rain. The ballroom smelled like money and self-importance. Brass medals and silk dresses, senators shaking hands with CEOs. I wasn't impressed. You can't buy integrity, and most of the people here tried. Then Claire decided to put on a show. She tapped her glass with a fork, smiled that smile she reserved for cameras, and said loud enough for the table to stop eating, "I just have to say how proud I am of my little sister. Tessa really proves that anyone can wear a uniform. The rest of us have to do the real work." The laughter hit me before the words did. Polite, delayed, cautious, like they were checking whether it was okay to laugh. It was. Claire always made sure it was. Ethan chuckled too, that awkward little noise people make when they're scared to pick a side. I just smiled. My stomach was tight, but my voice was calm. "Some people serve the country. Some just serve wine at the after-party," I said, raising my own glass. A few smiles froze halfway up. Claire blinked, that flicker she gets when someone throws a punch she didn't see coming. The conversation stumbled back to defense budgets and foreign contracts. Claire turned to the senator beside her, pretending I wasn't there. That was her favorite move, erase, don't confront. 10 minutes later, while dessert plates clinked, I caught her saying, "She's good with logistics, just not relationships." The table laughed again, and this time Ethan didn't even pretend to stop her. He just looked down, like the tablecloth had suddenly become fascinating. I stared at him for 3 seconds, long enough for him to feel it, short enough that no one noticed. Then, I set my fork down, wiped my mouth with the linen napkin, and said clearly, "If my marriage is the entertainment, I'll save you the encore." I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked out. No one said a word, not even Claire, especially not Claire. The air outside the hotel felt cleaner. I'd taken deeper breaths under gunfire, but somehow this one meant more. I walked to my car parked under the awning, passing drivers in black suits who opened doors for people too rich to thank them. My heels clicked like a countdown. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. My mind was already shifting to the calm that comes right before a mission. There's always that moment when everything gets painfully clear, the difference between who you are and who they think you are. Ethan texted me before I hit the driver's seat. "Ethan, you overreacted." I stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. That single message told me more than any argument ever could. By the time I got home, the house looked staged, too perfect, like a showroom for a marriage that had already expired. I poured a glass of water, not wine, and stood in the kitchen staring at the framed photo of the three of us at last year's conference, me in uniform, Ethan with his hand on my shoulder, Claire between us smiling like she owned the camera. Maybe she always had. The doorbell rang at 11:47. No one rings your door that late with good news. I opened the door to an empty porch and a single envelope on the mat. My name written in black marker. Inside was a printed email subject line, Project Valor, internal discussion. The message was between Claire and an executive at Lockfield. If we secure the contract using the prototype from Ward Defense, Ethan can transition the assets quietly. Once Tess is out, we'll fold her brand into the Lockfield umbrella. She's a soldier, not a strategist. My pulse didn't even spike. It was too cold for that. I read it twice, then folded the paper neatly, like an after-action report. My sister had used me as a stepping stone, and my husband had helped her climb. 12 years of discipline kept my hands from shaking. I grabbed my laptop, searched through company documents, and confirmed the worst. Ethan had created a new LLC 3 months earlier. The same client list. The same service descriptions. Different owner. He wasn't even creative. I sat there for an hour, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator. No tears, no outburst. Just that deep, sinking quiet where betrayal lands and starts to harden into something else. My military training kicked in without me realizing. Step 1. Gather intel. Step 2. Assess threats. Step 3. Plan countermeasures. I forwarded the email to a secure backup drive, logged into our shared accounts, and saw the final insult. He'd already transferred company funds to operational expenses for his new venture. Claire's fingerprints were all over the invoices. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was federal. I thought about calling him, but what was the point? You can't negotiate with people who've already decided you're collateral. Instead, I opened an old contact folder marked JAG. I hadn't spoken to Major Lucas Grant since my last deployment, but his name still came with a kind of moral gravity. He was the kind of man who quoted regulations the way priests quoted scripture. I typed, "Lucas, it's Tessa Ward. I need a quiet consultation. Possible defense contract violation involving Lockfield Industries. Family connection. Don't ask yet." Then I hit send. Outside, the street was silent. A flag on the neighbor's porch hung motionless in the still air. The world always looks peaceful right before something explodes. I turned off the kitchen light, left the envelope on the counter, and walked down the hall. The bedroom smelled like Ethan's cologne, expensive, synthetic confidence. I picked up his cufflinks from the dresser and set them gently on the nightstand. He'd know what that meant. Soldiers have their own language for endings. When I finally lay down, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Claire's toast, her laughter, the way Ethan didn't say a word. Then I thought about something else, the way every battlefield starts the same way. One person underestimates the quiet one. And this time, I was perfectly quiet. The next morning, sunlight leaked through the blinds like it had no idea what kind of night it was intruding on. My body woke up before my mind did. That old military habit, the kind that didn't care if you'd slept or not. The house was silent, too silent, for a place that used to hum with routine. I walked into the kitchen barefoot, poured coffee, and let the bitterness hit hard. The envelope from last night still sat on the counter, like evidence waiting for an investigator. Ethan's car wasn't in the driveway. Good. That meant I wouldn't have to look at him before my temper decided to act on its own. I opened my laptop, logged into our company server, and started scanning access logs. Ethan's name showed up again and again, tagging files he had no business touching, client contracts, pricing models, and confidential military specs that required clearance he didn't have. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd compromised national security. I picked up my phone and called Major Grant. He answered on the first ring. "Tessa," he said, that calm, unshakable tone he used even in combat zones. "You said family in Lockfield. You need to tell me how deep this goes." "Deep enough that if I handle it wrong, it becomes a Senate hearing," I said. There was silence for half a beat, then, "Meet me in Arlington, 2 hours." I hung up, changed into jeans and a black blazer civilian armor, and drove out. The highway blurred, my thoughts sharper than the skyline ahead. Grant's office sat behind a nondescript facade, the kind of building that didn't attract curiosity. He was waiting for me at the door, file already open. "I checked Lockfield," he said as soon as I sat down. "Your sister's company has 3 active defense contracts, all classified under advanced systems testing. One of them matches the code name in your email, Project Valor. The transfer Ethan's setting up could fall under the Defense Production Act. That's felony territory." He slid a folder toward me. Government language, acronyms, legal codes. "If they used your tech to back-channel funding or rebrand military R&D as private innovation, it's not just unethical, it's criminal." I let out a breath, steady but low. "And my husband's the delivery system." Grant nodded. "And your sister's the architect." There was a cold satisfaction in hearing someone else say it. Confirmation made betrayal real. "I can open a quiet inquiry," he continued. "But it needs evidence, solid, traceable, time-stamped. No emotional narratives. You gather the data, I'll build the paper trail." "Copy that," I said automatically, military instincts overriding emotion. He smiled faintly. "You never stopped being an officer, did you?" "Apparently not," I said. I just changed the battlefield. Back in my car, I called Claire. She answered on the second ring, her voice all silk and control. Tessa, I was wondering when you'd crawl out from last night's scene. Cut the act, I said. I got your email. And? There was a pause, then a small laugh. Oh, that. You're not supposed to take things so literally. Business gets messy. You know that. Funny, I said. I thought stealing was illegal, not messy. You always make everything dramatic. Ethan and I were just exploring options that made sense for everyone. For everyone but me, I said. Her tone sharpened. You're overreacting. Ethan came to me because you've been distracted, too attached to your fieldwork, not focused on long-term growth. I'm saving your company from yourself. That was classic Claire commit betrayal, then frame it as charity. I could almost see her smirk through the phone. You might want to lawyer up, I said, because you're about to find out what distracted really looks like. She hung up without another word. By noon, I'd accessed our backups, cloned every database Ethan hadn't wiped, and started documenting. Every invoice, every encrypted message, every unauthorized access log. Evidence builds differently when you've been trained to analyze threat reports. Patterns appear faster. Motives line up like enemy positions on a grid. At 3 p.m., Ethan finally came home. He dropped his keys on the table and gave me that half smile he used when he thought charm could erase damage. Tessa, can we just talk? About what? How you and my sister plan to gut the company while pretending to love me. He winced. You read that out of context. There's no context for treason, Ethan. He raised his hands. It's not like that. Claire said it was a merger, a chance to scale operations. By erasing my name from every contract? By transferring defense data without clearance? His eyes flickered, the kind of micro-expression that tells you guilt has finally realized it's cornered. Tessa, I made a mistake. I was trying to protect us. By selling me out? He swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the counter where my laptop sat open. You can't report this. It'll destroy everything we've built. You mean everything I built? I corrected. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. If you go public, Claire will bury you. She's got the lawyers, the politicians, the connections. You're a soldier, not a politician. You'll lose. Maybe, I said. But I've won harder fights with less backup. For the first time, his expression cracked. The calm businessman mask slipped, revealing what was underneath fear and anger, wrapped in entitlement. You think anyone's going to believe you? A woman with a military past, PTSD rumors, and a chip on her shoulder? You're emotional, unpredictable. That's why Claire doesn't trust you. I smiled. You rehearsed that line with her, didn't you? He didn't answer, just stood there, realizing the war he'd declared wasn't going to be fought with lawyers or PR. It was going to be fought with facts. I grabbed my jacket and brushed past him. Don't follow me, Ethan. Outside, the sky had turned that pale, metallic color before a storm. I drove straight to the Pentagon Annex where Grant worked nights. I handed him the flash drive without a word. He connected it, skimmed the contents, and let out a low whistle. This is comprehensive. Will it hold up? Oh, it'll do more than that. If Lockfield touched federal data without authorization, there'll be subpoenas before the week's out. Good, I said, because I'm not stopping at subpoenas. Grant studied me for a moment. Tessa, I need to say this off the record. Whatever you're planning, keep it legal. You've already been burned once. Don't let revenge be the second fire. I met his eyes. Revenge isn't the goal, Major. Accountability is. Alu. He nodded slowly, but his expression said he didn't fully believe me. Maybe he was right. When I left the building, it was raining hard enough to wash away the streetlights. I stood under it for a moment, letting the cold water ground me. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was surgical, precise, designed to dismantle me completely. I got back in the car, the engine humming softly. My reflection in the windshield looked like someone I used to know, but tougher, sharper. I whispered it out loud just to hear it once. You picked the wrong soldier to underestimate. The wipers beat a steady rhythm as I drove into the dark, headlights cutting through the storm, the mission already forming in my head phase by phase, target by target, with Claire Ward at the center of every one. Rain still streaked the windshield when I reached home, though home didn't feel like the right word anymore. Ethan's car was gone this time, maybe for good. Fine. Let him run back to Claire. Snakes slither best together. I packed fast 2 duffel bags, the essentials, my encrypted drives, and the uniform I'd kept pressed in the back of the closet. The same one I'd worn in Afghanistan when decisions were simple. Survive, protect, repeat. I didn't write a note. No explanations, no apologies. People like Ethan and Claire didn't deserve closure, they deserved consequences. At dawn, I drove south toward Fort Liberty, the fog lifting over the highway like the sky was undecided about forgiving anyone. My ID still worked at the gate, which felt like a small miracle, or maybe poetic justice. The guards snapped to attention, probably wondering why a defense contractor in civilian clothes looked like she was marching into a war zone. Colonel Avery was already in his office when I arrived. He'd been my commanding officer 5 years ago, a man who believed in results, not resumes. When he saw me standing in the doorway, dripping from the rain, he didn't ask why. He just nodded. Ward. Heard rumors. Sit down. He poured coffee without offering sugar. That was his way of saying, welcome back. I need a clean posting, I said. Temporary assignment, civilian liaison. Off record if possible. His eyebrow lifted. That's not how this works. You burned bright when you left, Ward. Built a company, made the news, now you're walking in here like you're trying to disappear. I'm not disappearing, I said evenly. I'm repositioning. He studied me for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair. You're not the first soldier to learn the battlefield at home can be dirtier than the one overseas. That line hit harder than I wanted it to. He typed something into his terminal and said, There's a project out of Quantico. Civil Military Innovation Task Force. They could use someone who knows procurement, tech, and politics. 3-month advisory slot. It's not glamorous, but it's clean. Perfect, I said. Ward, he said before I could leave. Whatever you're running from, don't turn it into a crusade. I've seen good people confuse justice with vengeance. I'll keep that in mind, sir, I said, lying through my teeth. By evening, I had a government badge again. The kind that opened just enough doors to see what was happening behind them. Quantico smelled like memory-sterile hallways, polished floors, distant gunfire from the range. The place where loyalty still meant something. My office was a windowless cube next to the testing labs. The first thing I noticed was a dusty whiteboard with Aegis Path Initiative scrawled across it, a prototype program linking AI logistics to field operations. The project had stalled after Lockfield Industries pulled their funding. Claire's company, of course. I almost laughed. The universe had a dark sense of humor. Over the next few days, I worked in silence, digging through files. The Aegis Path model had potential. Real potential. If I rebuilt it right, I could create something Lockfield would never be able to copy or corrupt. Every stolen contract, every manipulated deal could be neutralized by something better, something untouchable. At night, I ran along the base perimeter under dim floodlights. The rhythm of my steps brought back the version of me that didn't need anyone's permission to win. No sister, no husband, no validation. Just the mission. On the 3rd night, Grant called. They froze the accounts connected to Ethan's LLC, he said. Claire's lawyers are already moving to claim ignorance. Of course they are, I replied. Are you sure you want to keep your name out of this for now? You're the victim here. Victims react, I said. Strategists prepare. He sighed. You sound like someone gearing up for a campaign. Maybe I am, I said, glancing at the Aegis Path schematics glowing on my monitor. But this one's built on data, not blood. By the following week, I'd assembled a small internal team of engineers and analysts from old deployments, people who owed me favors or just believed in doing the right thing without the press release. One of them, Sergeant Dean Harris, had been my comms tech overseas. When he walked into my office, he grinned. Didn't think I'd see the day you'd be back behind government walls. Don't get comfortable, I said. We're not here to play it safe. Wouldn't dream of it, ma'am. We started refining Aegis Path quietly, converting outdated code into something that could outthink Lockfield's entire infrastructure. Every test we ran stripped another layer off Claire's monopoly. She didn't know it yet, but the ground was shifting under her feet. At lunch one afternoon, Dean leaned across the table. Heard Lockfield's pitching a new project, Valor Systems. Sound familiar? It should, I said. They stole the name from my files. Dean raised an eyebrow. You want me to dig around? No, I said. Not yet. Let them think I'm gone. Ghosts are harder to fight. The phrase stuck in my head long after he left. Ghosts don't announce themselves, they haunt strategically. That night, I checked the trade registers. Claire's name appeared next to new filings every week, each more ambitious than the last. She was expanding fast, too fast. That meant she was using my blueprints as leverage. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. She'd built her entire empire on the foundation I laid, and she hadn't noticed the cracks I'd left for her to trip on. At 2 a.m., I received an encrypted message from an unlisted contact. Heard what happened. Not surprised. She's been playing dirty with Pentagon procurement for months. Call me if you want receipts. No name, just a signature. J.C. I didn't have to guess. Captain Jordan Cole, military intelligence, once Lockfield's liaison before quitting, for ethical reasons. I'd always liked the guy. He didn't tolerate corruption, and didn't hide his disgust for Claire's type. I replied, "Send everything, quiet channel only," and within an hour, I had access to a treasure trove emails, meeting notes, and flagged financial trails. Lockfield wasn't just unethical. They were actively diverting federal contracts using insider data. Claire wasn't just playing corporate games, she was crossing into espionage territory. I leaned back, letting the implications sink in. This wasn't a family feud anymore. It was a national one. And I suddenly had everything I needed to prove it. At dawn, as the first hint of light touched the edges of the base, I made my decision. I wasn't just going to rebuild Aegis Path. I was going to make it the gold standard of military innovation. Independent, incorruptible, and entirely mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. Claire had mocked me for being a soldier in boardrooms, and now the Pentagon itself was about to fund the system that would ruin her career. I pinned my old unit patch to the corkboard above my desk, not as nostalgia, more like a reminder of the rules I lived by. Know your mission, know your enemy, and never attack until you control the field. By the time the sun was up, the path was set. I wasn't vanishing anymore. I was repositioning into the shadows exactly where I was most dangerous. The hum of servers replaced the silence I used to fear. My new office wasn't a corner suite or a marble lobby. It was a converted logistics hangar on the far side of the Quantico base, where the walls still smelled faintly of diesel and dust. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. Every decision here was earned, not inherited. Dean Harris stood beside me, his sleeves rolled, pointing at the updated Aegis Path schematic on the projector. "We've stripped out Lockfield's entire predictive chain," he said. "Our system runs on adaptive feedback instead of static mapping. It'll learn faster than anything on the market." "Good," I said. "Then let's make sure it never ends up in the wrong hands again." He gave me that knowing grin. "Meaning your sisters?" "Meaning anyone's who thinks ethics are optional," I said, though we both knew who I meant. We were operating under the radar officially. Aegis Path was a revived pilot project under the Defense Innovation Task Force. Unofficially, it was the first move in a silent counterattack. Each line of code, each algorithm we built, was one step closer to cutting Claire's company out of every contract they'd stolen. By the end of the week, I had 4 people on my team: Dean, Dr. Leona Bates, a data scientist who'd once built autonomous tracking for humanitarian missions; Captain Jordan Cole, the whistleblower who'd exposed Lockfield's procurement leaks; and myself. It wasn't much of an army, but I'd seen wars turned with less. Leona adjusted her glasses as she spoke, voice clipped but sharp. "I've been reviewing the funding trail you sent. Lockfield's been inflating R&D costs by routing payments through shell subsidiaries. Classic laundering. But here's the twist: they've labeled one as security consulting with your husband's signature." "Ex-husband," I corrected. "And yeah, I figured Ethan was their paper shield." Jordan leaned forward. "I can leak this internally. Get the Inspector General's office curious." "Not yet," I said. "We're not dropping bombs, we're building the targeting system." They exchanged glances, then nodded. The team was learning fast. I didn't believe in striking until the math guaranteed victory. Most days blurred together coffee that tasted like burnt sand, 20-hour shifts, the hum of fluorescent lights. But there was something liberating about rebuilding from ashes. No boardrooms, no cocktail politics, no family drama, just mission clarity. I wasn't just building Aegis Path. I was engineering a firewall for my own life. Around midnight, Leona brought over a portable monitor. I think you should see this. On screen was a live feed from a congressional tech symposium. Claire stood at the podium, a vision of polish and control. Behind her, a massive banner read, Lockfield Industries presents Project Valor. The crowd applauded as she described a revolutionary military logistics system capable of dynamic field adaptation. My system, my design. Even the phrasing matched an internal memo I'd written 3 years ago. Dean muttered a word that would have gotten him court-martialed in uniform. She's not even hiding it, Jordan said. She doesn't need to, I said quietly. She thinks I'm buried under bureaucracy. Leona turned to me. So what do? I smiled faintly. We outclass her in plain sight. The next morning, I filed the paperwork to establish Aegis Path Systems LLC, an independent military innovation firm operating under federal review. I listed Quantico as the primary development site and myself as CEO. Legally clean, ethically fireproof, and completely outside Lockfield's reach. Within a week, we had prototyped them as ready. I invited Colonel Avery to observe the test of field simulation using Aegis Path's predictive system to coordinate emergency medical drops. The algorithm adjusted flight paths in real time to avoid weather changes and active combat zones. When the last drone returned, every target had been hit within a 2-meter margin. Avery whistled low. You realize what you've got here, Ward? This isn't just logistics. This is future command control. That's the idea, I said. He nodded. I'll make sure the right people see it. You've earned that. The right people turned out to include the Department of Defense's Innovation Bureau. Within 3 weeks, I was called into a secure meeting at the Pentagon. Just me, 2 generals, and one very curious undersecretary, who looked at me like I was the missing piece of his re-election plan. This system could replace Lockfield's entire defense suite, he said after the presentation. It's faster, cheaper, and frankly smarter. Ender too. Then fund it, I said simply. He grinned. You don't mince words, do you? I stopped doing that the day someone stole my company. When the meeting ended, I left the building with a signed memorandum of understanding. Aegis Path Systems would receive federal evaluation status. That single sheet of paper changed everything. It meant legitimacy, leverage, and visibility, the 3 things Claire couldn't control. I walked out into the DC sun feeling lighter than I had in years. But that feeling didn't last. Because when you rise too fast, the people who tried to bury you start digging again. That evening, Dean burst into my office, holding his phone. You need to see this. He played a clip from a news broadcast, Claire, standing on the steps of the Capitol, telling reporters that certain rogue actors had stolen Lockfield's proprietary research and were attempting to mislead the Pentagon. She didn't say my name, but she didn't have to. Every journalist in that crowd knew who the rogue actor was. I let out a slow breath. She's going public. She's daring me to respond. Then respond, Jordan said. Not yet, I replied. If she's baiting me, there's a reason. She's scared. Leona nodded, probably because Aegis Path's data will pass audit before hers does. Exactly, I said. We don't counter noise with noise. We counter it with proof. The next few days, we tightened security around every project file. Grant quietly pushed the internal investigation through his channels. And in the background, I started building something even bigger. A presentation that would redefine not just Aegis Path, but me. Late one night, while everyone else was gone, I stood in the darkened lab watching code scroll across the screen. The hum of machines felt like an old friend. I realized how much I'd missed this, the work itself, stripped of ego and politics. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered anyway. A voice I hadn't heard in months said, Tessa, it's Ethan. I didn't reply. He sighed. Look, I know you hate me, but you need to know something. Claire's planning to destroy you. She's got contacts in the Defense Committee feeding her intel. Funny, I said, since you were her favorite contact once. This is different, he said, his voice shaking. She's paranoid. Thinks you're going to expose her funding trail. She's hiring private contractors, cyber specialists, to hack your system. Night. I almost laughed. She's hiring mercenaries to outsmart the woman who built battlefield counterintelligence software? Tessa, I'm serious. So am I said. Tell your boss she's about to find out what an actual defense looks like. I hung up before he could say another word. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the cursor blink on the screen, heartbeat steady, mind already calculating next steps. If Claire wanted a war, I'd give her one. But it wouldn't look like one. No shouting, no public spectacle, just precision. Quiet victories stacked one after another until she had nowhere left to stand. The cursor blinked once more. Then I started typing. The following week began before the sun did. The hangar buzzed with energy, cables snaking across the concrete floor, monitors stacked like a miniature command center. For months, we'd worked behind closed doors, building Aegis Path into something indestructible. Now, we were about to bring it into the light. Dean was calibrating the drone interface when I walked in. "You ready for your big moment, boss?" he asked, not looking up. "I don't do moments," I said, setting my coffee down. "I do results." He grinned, spoken like someone about to change the defense industry. Oh. The demonstration had been approved by the Defense Innovation Bureau as part of a joint military tech showcase live-streamed, public, and attended by senators, journalists, and half the Pentagon. Claire would be there too, of course. Lockfield was co-sponsoring the event. The irony wasn't lost on me. By 0900, the venue looked like a cross between a weapons expo and a TED Talk. Huge banners flapped in the March wind, advancing defense through technology. Rows of suits and uniforms filled the seats, murmuring about the rumored systems being unveiled. I recognized the types, the kind who'd sell a missile with a smile. From the stage, I spotted Claire near the front, her hair perfect, her expression tighter than usual. She hadn't expected to see me here. That was the first victory of the day. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "Next, we'll hear from former U.S. Army officer and founder of Aegis Path Systems, Tessa Ward." Now, for a moment, the room went still. Claire's smile froze halfway into something brittle. I stepped to the podium, feeling the lights heat my face. "Good morning," I began, my tone steady, but sharp enough to cut glass. Aegis Path is a system designed to predict and adapt to battlefield variables in real time. Weather, terrain, supply logistics, everything that saves soldiers' lives and taxpayer dollars. Built by those who've been on the ground, not behind glass walls. End of 4. Every word was deliberate. No slides yet, no jargon, just truth delivered like a strike. I watched a few Lockfield executives exchange uneasy looks. They recognized the phrasing. It was almost identical to what Claire had claimed as her own 2 weeks earlier. I clicked the remote, and the first live feed appeared behind me, a simulation running on split screens. On one side, Lockfield's Project Valor. Model, static routes, lagging updates, delayed response times. On the other, Aegis Path. Adaptive, instantaneous, flawless. Gasps rippled through the audience. "This system doesn't just react," I continued. "It learns. It protects soldiers before they even know they're in danger. And unlike some competitors, every algorithm here was built under full federal oversight, using proprietary designs developed by Aegis Path Systems, documented, time-stamped, and verified." Claire's jaw tightened. Her public mask didn't crack, but I could see the micro-expressions, the small, sharp twitches that meant she knew exactly what I was doing. Reporters started murmuring. Someone in the front row whispered to a Lockfield exec, who immediately pulled out his phone. Dean smirked from the tech table, mouthing, "We got them." Halfway through my presentation, a hand went up in the audience. "Miss Ward, a journalist called Lockfield Industries, has a system nearly identical to this one. Are you suggesting they copied your work?" I smiled, calm, confident, lethal. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm showing you the difference between innovation and imitation." The room erupted in whispers and flashes of cameras. Claire's PR handler stood, whispering urgently into her ear. She stayed seated, but her eyes were pure venom. I finished the demo with one final touch, a recorded testimonial from Colonel Avery himself, pre-cleared and authorized. On the giant screen, his face appeared, saying, "Aegis Path represents the kind of technology that restores trust in defense partnerships. It's precise, transparent, and built by people who understand the value of service over profit." When the lights came up, the applause wasn't polite, it was real, relieved even. Everyone in that room had seen what integrity looked like, and it didn't wear a Lockfield badge. Afterward, as people crowded the floor, shaking hands and snapping photos, Claire approached. Her perfume hit me before her voice did. "Nice show," she said. "A little dramatic for a demo. Coming from you, that's almost a compliment." She smiled, tight and cold. "You think this changes anything? You just painted a target on your back." "Good," I said, leaning closer. "That means they'll stop aiming at my reputation and start aiming at facts." For a moment, she said nothing, just stared, her mask slipping long enough for something uglier to show through fear. Then she turned and walked away, her heels striking the marble like retreat fire. Dean caught up to me as the crowd thinned. "That was surgical," he said. "You didn't just expose them, you humiliated them." "Not yet," I said, picking up my jacket. "Humiliation's only worth it when it's public record." By the time we got back to Quantico, the headlines were already circulating online. Lockfield faces scrutiny after rival system outperforms Valor. The Bureau had issued a statement confirming they would review potential intellectual property concerns. In corporate terms, that was a direct hit. Grant called that evening. "Congratulations, you just detonated a political minefield." "Wasn't my intent," I said. "Of course it was," he replied, half smiling through the phone. "Just promise me you'll stay inside the law while the smoke clears." "Now." "Always do," I said, though we both knew laws bend under pressure. After we hung up, I stared at the headlines again. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, there was a familiar unease, the kind that creeps in right before the next attack. At midnight, the lab lights dimmed automatically. Dean had gone home, the base quiet, except for the hum of servers. I walked the perimeter once, out of habit, scanning shadows the way I used to during night patrols. You never really unlearn that. When I got back to my desk, a notification blinked on my monitor. Unrecognized access attempt detected. The line of code on screen wasn't from us, it was Lockfield's signature encryption pattern. Claire wasn't wasting time. She'd launched her counterstrike before the applause had even died. I smiled faintly. Predictable. Typing quickly, I activated the decoy network, a sandbox designed to mimic Aegis Path's live environment. If her hackers thought they were stealing data, they'd actually be downloading trap files filled with traceable metadata. It was bait disguised as victory. Within minutes, their signal bounced back from a Lockfield IP address in Maryland. I took a screenshot, timestamped it, and uploaded it to the federal log server. Ironclad proof of cyber intrusion. Then I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor casting light across the empty room. Claire wanted war. I'd just given her the first taste of what it felt like to lose one. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. The base floodlights flickered, but I stayed where I was steady, waiting, ready. The kind of calm that comes right before the next move on the battlefield. The cyber attack traces hit the federal servers before dawn. By the time the coffee finished brewing, my screen filled with notifications from the Defense Cyber Division confirming unauthorized intrusion attempts linked to Lockfield Industries. They didn't name Claire yet, but I didn't need them to. Her signature was all over the code, right down to the same encryption protocol she'd bragged about developing 3 years ago. Dean walked in just as I was forwarding the evidence to Major Grant. His eyes went wide when he saw the federal seal on the alert. "You're kidding me? They actually went through with it?" "They didn't just go through with it," I said, sliding him my tablet. "They left fingerprints. Corporate arrogance meets federal jurisdiction." Grant called an hour later. "Tessa, you just handed me a felony case wrapped in a bow. The Bureau's opening an official investigation into Lockfield. Cyber espionage, data theft, contract fraud, the works." I didn't smile. "That's not enough." He paused. "You mean for justice?" "No," I said. "For accountability." At 0900, I was in a conference room at the Pentagon with 3 investigators, 2 lawyers, and a wall of monitors showing timelines of Lockfield's crimes. My evidence filled half the screen. Login records, data transfer paths, Ethan's digital signatures on forged invoices. The room buzzed with quiet disbelief. One of the investigators, a woman named Franklin, flipped through the documents and said, "You realize this isn't just theft. It's conspiracy against the federal government. If this checks out, people are going to prison." "Good," I said flatly. "Then let's make sure the right people get the right rooms." They worked fast. By noon, subpoenas were filed. Federal marshals raided Lockfield's D.C. offices that same afternoon, seizing servers and freezing accounts. Claire's PR team spun the story instantly, calling it a routine compliance review. But the photos leaking online told the truth agents carrying hard drives and cardboard boxes past Lockfield's gold-lettered lobby sign. Dean burst into my office, grinning. "You see the news? They just shut down her entire East Coast branch." I didn't look up from my laptop. "It's not over yet," he frowned. "You really can't enjoy this for 5 seconds?" "Enjoyment's temporary," I said. "Victory's permanent." 2 days later, Claire called. Not through lawyers herself. Her voice came through tight and cold. "You've made a mistake, Tessa. You've dragged this into the public eye, and when the smoke clears, you'll look unhinged." I leaned back in my chair, calm. "Funny. The federal agents seemed pretty clear-headed when they took your servers." "You think they'll stop with me?" she hissed. "You've tied your name to this investigation. If they find one irregularity in your past, they'll burn you too." "Let them," I said. "I've got nothing to hide." "You can't say the same." There was silence. I could almost hear her nails tapping against her phone. "You've always been self-righteous," she said finally. "That's your weakness. You don't know when to stop." "Neither do arsonists," I replied. "But at least I put out fires. You start them." She hung up. By the end of that week, the Department of Defense issued an official statement suspending all Lockfield contracts pending review. News anchors couldn't say the words "federal investigation" fast enough. I'd expected satisfaction, maybe even vindication. What I felt instead was something heavier, like watching a structure collapse that I'd spent years trying to stabilize before realizing it was rotten to the core. The next blow came quietly. My legal advisor, Patricia Wells, a woman with a stare sharp enough to cut marble, slid a document across my desk. "You should see this." Lockfield's lawyers filed a counterclaim this morning. Defamation, corporate sabotage, unlawful possession of trade secrets. I scanned the first page. "They're accusing me of stealing my own work?" Patricia smiled thinly. "Classic move. When you can't deny the evidence, discredit the source." I closed the folder. "Fine. Then we go to court." The first hearing took place in a federal courtroom in D.C., cameras flashing outside like a firing line. Claire arrived in a tailored gray suit, immaculate as always, the picture of composure. Ethan trailed behind her, paler than I remembered, avoiding eye contact. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Patricia sat beside me, tapping her pen with surgical precision. Across the aisle, Claire's attorney, a smug corporate type named Howard Pierce, stood to speak. "Your Honor," he began, "my clients maintain that Miss Ward's so-called evidence was obtained through illegal surveillance. Her actions constitute corporate sabotage under federal law." Patricia rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the evidence was gathered from government to monitored systems during an active investigation. My client did not hack Lockfield Industries. Lockfield hacked her." The judge, an older man with the patience of a sniper, peered over his glasses. "I'll remind both parties that theatrics have no place in this courtroom." Pierce nodded, but his smirk lingered. "We're prepared to show Miss Ward's financial records, indicating questionable transfers during her tenure at Ward Defense Solutions." He displayed a screen of transactions, several large payments routed to private accounts. The room murmured. My pulse didn't even spike. Patricia didn't flinch. "Those are security deposits for subcontractor operations pre-approved by the Department of Defense. You'll find every receipt in the discovery file, assuming you actually read it." The judge frowned. "Mr. Pierce, verify your sources before making insinuations." Claire's composure cracked for the first time. Her jaw tightened, fingers twitching against her folder. I met her gaze across the table and held it calm, steady, unyielding. She looked away first. When the hearing ended, reporters swarmed outside the courthouse. One of them shoved a mic toward me. "Miss Ward, are you confident you'll win against Lockfield?" "I don't fight for wins," I said. "I fight for truth." End of chapter. Behind me, cameras caught Claire brushing past without answering questions. Her perfect control was slipping, and everyone saw it. That evening, Patricia called. "We've got something better than a verdict. A whistleblower from Lockfield just reached out. Says he has internal emails proving they authorized the hack. Who is he? I asked. An IT director. Anonymous for now, but he's credible. He'll testify under protection if necessary. Ido. The next morning, we met the man in a secure office downtown. Mid-30s, nervous, wearing the look of someone who'd carried guilt too long. He slid a flash drive across the table. Everything's on there. The orders came from Claire herself. She told us to neutralize the leak, meaning Aegis Path. She said, and I quote, "Tessa's playing soldier again. Time to remind her who built the empire." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We'll need to verify all of this." He nodded quickly. "Already did. Timestamps, IP trails, meeting transcripts, it's all there." I picked up the flash drive, small and cold in my hand. "You just changed the game," I said. By that night, federal investigators had the files. Grant confirmed what we already knew. "She's finished," he said. "These emails alone could get her indicted for fraud and espionage." "Don't say finished," I replied. "People like Claire always think they can rewrite the ending." And still, something inside me loosened a knot that had been tightening since that luxury dinner months ago. The system that tried to break me was finally turning on itself. When I stepped outside the office that night, the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, scattered and bright. The air smelled like rain again, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. Across the street, a billboard flashed my name under the headline, "Whistleblower CEO exposes defense giant in historic case." I stared at it for a moment, then kept walking. I wasn't a whistleblower. I was just someone who'd stopped letting other people speak for her. Somewhere behind me, thunder rumbled. Faint but steady, less like a warning now, more like a confirmation. The headlines multiplied faster than I could read them. Lockfield Industries under federal investigation. Sister CEOs at war over defense secrets. Marriage betrayal and a $200 million contract scandal. Every network wanted a piece of the story. Every journalist wanted an exclusive. And every opinion panel on cable news had an expert explaining why I was either a hero, a traitor, or both. For the first time in years, people said my name without attaching it to Claire's. But victory felt strange when the world was watching for your reaction like a televised confession. Patricia warned me not to speak to the press until the trial date was set, but silence has a way of making people invent stories for you. So, when a producer from Frontline America called and asked for a live interview, I agreed on one condition. I wouldn't talk about family. I'd talk about accountability. Dean didn't like the idea. "They'll bait you," he said, scrolling through social media where trolls were dissecting my past like forensic scientists. "They're gonna twist whatever you say." Now, they can twist words, I replied, but they can't fake proof. The interview took place in a neutral studio downtown. No glamour, no stage lights, just 2 chairs and a camera. The host was a seasoned journalist named Meredith Kane, known for cutting through political doublespeak like a surgeon. She started soft. "Tessa Ward, former Army logistics officer turned defense innovator, now the woman at the center of one of the biggest corporate scandals of the decade. Did you ever imagine it would come to this?" "No," I said plainly. "But I also never imagined my own sister would weaponize my work against me." Her eyebrow arched slightly. "So you're confirming Claire Ward's direct involvement?" "I'm confirming the evidence speaks louder than both of us." We spent 30 minutes dissecting the investigation. The cyber attacks, the stolen data, the whistleblower testimony. I stayed composed, every word measured, every fact verified. But I knew what everyone wanted wasn't justice. They wanted blood. Near the end, Meredith leaned forward. "If you could say one thing to your sister right now, what would it be?" I looked straight into the camera. That integrity doesn't disappear when someone steals your name. It just finds a louder microphone. When the interview aired that evening, it went viral in under an hour. My inbox filled with messages, former colleagues, strangers, even soldiers who'd used my early logistics software overseas. Some thanked me for standing up. Others accused me of humiliating my family. Truth doesn't pick sides, it just exposes who was hiding behind it. But the exposure didn't just burn Claire. It lit up everything connected to her. Within days, Lockfield's board of directors announced an emergency audit. Investors fled like rats from a sinking ship. Senators who'd once toasted her at fundraisers suddenly couldn't recall any conversations about her projects. The company's stock plummeted 30% overnight. Ethan, as always, played his part in the drama. He showed up at my office unannounced, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 2 months. His voice carried that mix of guilt and desperation people only use when they realize redemption doesn't take IOUs. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said. "Claire told me it was a restructuring. I cut him off. "You thought betraying me was a career move. Turns out, it was a full-time job." He flinched. "I'm trying to make amends. Then start by staying out of my life." He didn't argue, just stared at the floor before muttering, "She's losing it, Tessa. The stress, the pressure, she's paranoid. You might want to watch your back." I almost laughed. I've spent my entire adult life watching my back. Now, when he left, I locked the door behind him and stood at the window. Across the street, cameras had already started gathering. They were waiting for the next headline, the next photo of me walking to my car, or maybe a shot of me cracking under pressure. But they'd be waiting a long time. Because while the media obsessed over family scandal, I was focused on results. Aegis Path Systems was no longer a prototype, it was a phenomenon. The Pentagon had officially certified our platform for field deployment. We'd been awarded 2 contracts within a month, both worth more than everything Claire had stolen combined. Dean called it poetic justice. I called it efficiency. Still, the media storm had a way of finding cracks. Claire's legal team launched a smear campaign, leaking old emails, twisting phrases, implying I'd manipulated evidence. They even dragged up my service record, trying to frame PTSD as emotional instability. Right. The morning one of those articles dropped, Leona burst into my office holding a newspaper. "They're calling you the unstable hero." I looked up from my computer. Catchy. Sounds like a Netflix series. She blinked. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm furious," I said. "But anger's fuel, not strategy." That afternoon, I held a press conference not as a victim, not as a whistleblower, but as a CEO. The room was packed, cameras flashing like gunfire. I walked to the podium in a navy suit, no notes in hand. "For months there's been noise," I began. "Rumors, accusations, distractions. I'm not here to silence them. I'm here to show what comes after." I gestured toward the massive screen behind me. It displayed Aegis Path's latest field performance. Supply routes optimized, mission efficiency improved by 47%, casualty risk reduced by nearly half. Cold, verifiable data. This, I said, is the difference between politics and purpose. Reporters scribbled furiously. Somewhere in the back, a Lockfield rep tried to ask about the ongoing lawsuit. I didn't let her finish. Litigation doesn't build systems. Integrity does. And integrity, unlike technology, can't be hacked. The applause started cautiously, then grew. For the first time since this mess began, the narrative shifted. The story wasn't sisters at war anymore. It was a soldier-turned-innovator rebuilding what corruption tried to destroy. But public approval is fragile. Later that night, the news broke that Claire had been served with a federal indictment. Fraud, conspiracy, cybercrime. Her photo appeared on every network, once the face of Lockfield, now framed in disgrace. I didn't cheer. I didn't post anything. I just sat in my apartment, watching her image fade from one channel to the next. For years, she'd been the storm in my life, the voice that reminded me I wasn't enough. Now she was silent. The next morning, reporters camped outside my door again. One yelled, "Miss Ward, do you have a statement about your sister's arrest?" I stopped just long enough to say, "I don't celebrate collapse. I rebuild from it." And I meant it. Because underneath all the noise, all the cameras in courtrooms, what mattered wasn't revenge, it was reclaiming my name, my work, and the part of myself I'd buried to keep the peace. Still, the irony didn't escape me. Claire had mocked me once for acting like the military could teach business. Now the same discipline, precision, and strategy that won wars had dismantled her empire. Later that week, Grant called from D.C. "The committee wants to meet you. They're recommending you for the Defense Innovation Council. It's a civilian advisory role policy, oversight, funding. So they want me to help build the system that replaced the one they broke?" I said. He chuckled. "Something like that." Then, I didn't answer right away. My mind was somewhere else on that luxury dinner months ago, on the laughter, on Ethan's silence, and Claire's toast that started it all. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about precision, about turning pain into architecture. Tell them yes, I said finally. I'm not done building. Outside the window, the city lights reflected off the river, blurred but constant. The storm hadn't ended, it had just changed direction. And this time, I was the one steering through it, steady as ever. The congressional hearing wasn't about family. It was about contracts, oversight, accountability, all the buzzwords politicians use when they're trying to look clean in a dirty room. But anyone who'd followed the case knew this was the real stage, the final battlefield. No court verdict could match the spectacle of live televised judgment. I arrived early. No entourage, no flash. Just a simple black suit and a folder of documents I already knew by heart. The corridors of Capitol Hill smelled like polished wood and ambition. Cameras lined the hallway, reporters whispering into microphones as if they were covering a coronation or a funeral, depending on which side they thought would win. Claire arrived 20 minutes later. She wore white. Always did when she wanted to project innocence. Her lawyers flanked her like bodyguards, faces stiff and cautious. For a second, our eyes met across the marble floor. She gave me that small, practiced smile, the one she used to flash before landing a deal or a dagger. But this time, I didn't return it. Inside the chamber, the room filled quickly. Committee members, aides, media crews. The hum of chatter quieted when the chairperson struck the gavel. This hearing will come to order. We are here to address allegations of contract fraud, cyber espionage, and national security breaches involving Lockfield Industries and its subsidiaries. The air felt heavier than any courtroom. Every light, every lens, every microphone aimed at us. Claire's attorney spoke first, reciting a list of denials that sounded rehearsed to the syllable. My client categorically rejects all accusations. Any overlapping technology between Lockfield and Aegis Path systems is coincidental, the result of shared industry standards. The chairperson turned toward me. Ms. Ward, as the whistleblower and original developer of the Aegis Path framework, do you have a statement? I stood. Yes, sir. Coincidence doesn't explain identical source code, matching data signatures, and server logs that show direct downloads from my systems into Lockfield servers. Coincidence doesn't hire hackers or authorize forged clearance documents. And coincidence doesn't delete payroll records the day before federal agents arrive. A low murmur swept through the room. Claire's face didn't move, but her hands tightened on the table. The chairperson nodded. Do you have documentation to support these claims? I handed the folder to the clerk. Every log, timestamp, and transfer trace, independently verified by the Department of Defense. He flipped through the pages, brows lifting slightly. Impressive work, Miss Ward. Thank you, I said evenly. I've had practice identifying threats. Claire's lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, this is a witch hunt driven by sibling rivalry. My client's company has served this country for 20 years. Miss Ward's accusations are an attempt to... The chairperson cut him off. Save it. We've read the filings. He turned to Claire. Miss Ward, did you authorize or instruct any employees to obtain data from your sister's company? She took a slow breath. No, sir. I had no knowledge of any improper activity. The clerk projected one of the whistleblower's emails onto the main screen. The subject line read, Project Valor Adaptation, Directive from CW, her initials. The timestamp matched the night before Lockfield's servers had breached mine. The room went silent. Claire blinked once, twice, before her lawyer tried to interject. That doesn't prove authorship. The chairperson raised his hand. It proves plenty. Another image flashed on the screen. A message thread showing Claire's private instructions to her IT director. Her words, clear as daylight. Tessa's getting too confident. Copy the framework before she patents the update. The sound of clicking cameras filled the air like distant gunfire. For the first time, Claire looked shaken. Her perfect posture slipped, her gaze darting toward her lawyer, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. I stayed silent. The data spoke better than I ever could. One of the committee members leaned forward. Miss Ward, can you explain why you used your family connection to gain access to classified systems? She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her lawyer whispered something. She nodded, swallowing hard. I was under pressure, she said finally. Lockfield was losing contracts. The board demanded innovation. I made poor decisions. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it was close enough. The kind of phrasing lawyers hate because it sounds like truth. The chairperson made a note, then turned back to me. Miss Ward, given your cooperation with the investigation and your contributions to defense innovation, this committee recommends you for full clearance restoration and civilian commendation. We thank you for your integrity. And for. There was polite applause, subdued but sincere. I nodded once. I just did my job. Claire looked like she wanted to speak, to reclaim the narrative. But every camera was pointed at her now, not with admiration, but curiosity, the kind reserved for tragedies that used to be people. After the hearing adjourned, the hallway erupted with noise. Reporters swarmed, flashbulbs exploding. I moved through them like fog, giving short answers that said everything without revealing anything. Outside, the sky was bright, sharp blue, one of those DC days that feels too clean for what just happened indoors. Dean was waiting by the steps, holding out a folder. You did it, he said. I didn't do it, I replied. The evidence did. He smirked. You're allowed to enjoy it, you know. I'll enjoy it when the ink dries on her conviction. He handed me a printout. You'll like this, then. It was an internal press release from Lockfield's board. Claire Ward had been relieved of her duties effective immediately. They'd cited irreparable loss of public confidence. I stared at the words for a long moment. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was closure. The kind that doesn't arrive with fireworks but with silence. Later that evening, I walked through the quiet streets near the river. The city glowed behind me, alive with gossip, analysis, noise. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls I didn't answer. In the reflection of the water, I saw two silhouettes, hers and mine, past and present, ambition and consequence. For years, we'd been mirrors of each other, each one defined by the other's success or failure. Now, one reflection was gone. As I walked back toward the base, Grant called. It's official, he said. She's being indicted next week. Multiple counts. I figured, I said. You all right? I will be. Our day. He hesitated, then said quietly, You know, when this started, I thought you were chasing revenge, but watching today, you were chasing restoration. Maybe both, I admitted, but they're not mutually exclusive. He chuckled. Well, whichever it was, you won. I didn't win, I said softly. I just stopped losing. When I hung up, the air was still. The kind of stillness that only comes after a storm when even the wind doesn't know what to do next. I walked past the rows of flagpoles lining the Pentagon's perimeter, their fabric snapping lightly in the breeze. In the distance, floodlights illuminated the city that had tried to bury me and ended up becoming my proof. Somewhere across town, Claire was probably sitting in her penthouse, watching the same news feed that once celebrated her, now dissecting her downfall. I wondered if she finally understood what I'd meant at that dinner the night she mocked my marriage, my choices, my so-called lack of ambition. She'd said some women marry up, others get lucky. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't realize that discipline, integrity, and endurance were their own kind of luck. I reached the parking lot, my reflection faint in the car window, tired, older, but steady. The kind of steady you only earn by surviving the people who tried to break you. The city kept buzzing around me, but I didn't feel part of it anymore. I wasn't fighting it. I wasn't proving anything. I was simply standing where I belonged. The weeks after the hearing felt like standing in the quiet center of a once raging storm. Everything that had been spinning out of control, my company, my family, my name, had finally settled into order, though the air still buzzed with aftermath. Washington moved on to its next scandal, as it always does. But Aegis Path didn't fade from the headlines. The Defense Department's contract went through, oversight panels approved the rollout, and for the first time, my team wasn't just surviving, we were leading. I moved the headquarters out of Quantico to a new facility in Arlington. Glass walls, clean lines, no boardroom art pretending to mean something. On the first day, I stood in the lobby as the sign went up. Aegis Path Systems, Operational Command Center. No family name attached. Just the mission. Dean arrived carrying 2 coffees as usual. So, this is it, he said, handing one to me. The empire you built from the rubble. Empire's a big word, I said. I just wanted something that couldn't be taken away again. He grinned. That's what every empire starts with. Aste. Inside, the place buzzed with engineers, analysts, and veterans who'd joined after hearing the story. They didn't treat me like a celebrity. They treated me like a leader who got things done. That was enough. A few days later, the Pentagon hosted a ceremony simple, restrained, the kind of event where medals mean less than handshakes. I didn't expect to be recognized, but when the secretary called my name, I felt every year of the fight settle in my chest like weight rediscovered. He handed me a plaque that read, "For distinguished service to defense innovation and ethical leadership." As the applause echoed, I caught Grant's eye from the crowd. He nodded once, that soldier's nod that says you did what had to be done. Later, as the crowd thinned, he walked over. "You've done more for the department than half its committees combined," he said. "Flattery from a colonel," I said. "Is that in the new regulations?" "Just in the unwritten ones," he replied, smiling. "What's next for you?" I looked around the room. Building. Not just tech culture. The kind where people don't have to choose between doing well and doing right. He nodded. "That's a harder war. I've fought worse." That night, when I returned to the office, the skyline stretched beyond the windows, DC glowing in gold and gray. I thought of Claire somewhere in the same city, awaiting trial, stripped of titles, her empire collapsing into depositions and defense lawyers. I didn't feel triumphant. I resolved. There's a difference between vengeance and vindication. One burns, the other restores. Leona stopped by my desk before heading out. "You got a letter," she said, dropping an envelope in front of me. "No return address." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single line written in neat handwriting. "You won, Tessa, but I did love you once. C." I stared at it for a while, then folded it neatly back into the envelope. There was nothing to say, nothing to feel. Claire's words were like an echo from a place I'd already evacuated. The following morning, reporters requested a feature on America's most unlikely innovator. I declined everyone. My PR team begged me to reconsider. It was great exposure, public credibility, momentum. But I didn't need exposure. I'd had enough of being visible. Instead, I flew to Fort Bragg to meet with field units testing Aegis Path's new module. Watching soldiers, real ones, use the system we'd built was better than any press coverage. One of them, a young captain, shook my hand and said, "Ma'am, this thing saves time and lives. You have no idea what that means out here." "I do," I said quietly. Back at headquarters, the team had transformed the office into a real operations hub. Dean had hung a small photo on the wall. The four of us, me, him, Leona, and Jordan, standing beside the first Aegis Path prototype. Beneath it, someone had scrawled a quote from one of my old training manuals. "Discipline is freedom in disguise." We'd become more than co-workers. We were a rebuilt unit, each one of us burned once by corruption, now designing systems that couldn't be compromised. That was the real empire. People who'd seen darkness and decided to build light anyway. Midweek, I was invited to testify before a defense subcommittee about ethical AI integration. The same senators who once ignored me now quoted my research like scripture. One of them asked, "Miss Ward, what lesson would you say your experience has taught the industry?" I paused. That leadership isn't about control, it's about responsibility, and that the best systems, human or digital, fail when integrity is treated like a feature instead of a foundation. The room went quiet. Someone scribbled the line down. It would end up on the next day's headlines, but I didn't care. Words meant less than the work behind them. A few nights later, I walked through the new facility alone. The hum of machines had become my soundtrack again, clean, steady, predictable. I passed by the server room, the same place where the first Aegis Path code was written in a borrowed lab under flickering lights. Now it pulsed with power, guarded, encrypted, unstoppable. Dean found me there, leaning against the doorframe. "Can't sleep?" "Just checking the perimeter," I said. "Old habits die hard. Good habit don't." He nodded toward the glowing servers. "You realize this system's going global? NATO just signed interest agreements. You're about to run operations across half the world." I smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'll need better coffee." He laughed, then hesitated. "You know, you could retire after this. Most people would." "Most people didn't lose everything to build it," I said. "This isn't something I walk away from. It's something I grow into." When he left, I stood there for a while, the room filled with the low thrum of electricity and purpose. I thought about the word empire. It used to mean control, dominance, conquest. Now, to me, it meant resilience. Not ruling over others, but mastering yourself enough that no one could ever rule you again. Outside, the night sky stretched wide over the Potomac. The city lights shimmered like data points, each one a choice, a consequence, a story. In the reflection of the glass, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't the naive engineer from years ago, or the betrayed wife, or the humiliated sister. She was something steadier, sharper, someone rebuilt by experience, instead of destroyed by it. The next morning, an internal memo arrived from the Department of Defense. Effective immediately, Aegis Path Systems will serve as the primary logistics partner for domestic and allied deployment initiatives. End of trait. Dean printed it, taped it to my office door, and wrote underneath, "Mission complete." I left it there but took out a pen and added 3 words beneath his. Mission just begun. No speeches, no champagne, no applause, just quiet acknowledgement. The kind of peace you get when the fight is over but the purpose remains. Somewhere, far from here, my sister's empire was being auctioned off piece by piece, but that wasn't my story anymore. Mine was built from something cleaner: discipline, loyalty, proof. And unlike hers, it would never need defending. The hum of the servers steadied like a heartbeat, syncing with mine, reminding me that control isn't about holding power, it's about deserving it. The morning of the parade began with the kind of cold air that wakes you up before the coffee does. The city had blocked off half of Constitution Avenue for the annual Armed Forces celebration, and for the first time in years, I wasn't there as an officer, a contractor, or a witness. I was simply there. Crowds lined the sidewalks, waving flags, kids on shoulders, camera phones raised toward the sky. Tanks rolled past in perfect formation, followed by marching bands and veterans' brigades. The sound of drums echoed off the buildings like a pulse the city still needed to feel alive. Dean had convinced me to attend. "It's symbolic," he'd said. "You started in uniform, you might as well see where it ends." He wasn't wrong. I stood off to the side near the reviewing stand, sunglasses hiding the exhaustion that success never really fixes. My name had appeared in the program under Civic Recognition, Defense Innovation, but I'd declined the podium seat. Too much noise, too much pageantry. When the color guard passed, a young cadet caught sight of me and snapped a salute. I returned it automatically, the motion muscle memory after all these years. For a brief second, I felt a tug in my chest, the kind that reminds you who you were before the wars, the lawsuits, the betrayals. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, listing names of honorees, the institutions they'd built, the missions they'd led. I heard Aegis Path Systems mentioned once, and the crowd applauded politely, without understanding how much blood and silence had built it. I preferred it that way. Grant found me near the barricades, coffee in one hand, wearing civilian clothes that somehow made him look even more military. "Didn't think I'd see you at one of these again," he said. "I promised I'd start doing normal things," I said, "though this might be pushing it." He chuckled. "You know the funny part? Half these people don't realize how much of today's logistics ran on your system." "I prefer invisible success," I said. "It doesn't need to defend itself." Now, he sipped his coffee. "Still haven't learned to take credit, huh?" "I take accountability. That's enough." As the parade continued, I watched families wave at the soldiers, proud and tearful in equal measure. For a moment, I wondered what Claire would have thought if she'd been standing here beside me, not as my rival but as my sister. We'd grown up watching parades like this as kids, our father pointing out the medals, explaining what each ribbon meant. Maybe somewhere deep down, we'd both been trying to earn his version of pride, just through opposite methods. The thought drifted away as quickly as it came. Dean joined us, holding 2 hot dogs and a grin that didn't belong in DC politics. "You're both way too serious," he said. "This is supposed to be a celebration." I raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you eat parade food?" "Since today," he said. "It's a new era." He wasn't wrong. It was a new era, though not the kind that gets marked by speeches or handshakes. After the hearing, the court finalized its decision quietly. Claire accepted a plea deal: suspended sentence, full restitution, lifetime ban from federal contracting. Her company was dismantled, assets liquidated, patents revoked. It didn't make me happy, But it made things right. There's a difference. Aegis Path, meanwhile, grew beyond anything I'd planned. We'd signed international partnerships, civilian disaster response contracts, even humanitarian programs. The same technology that once predicted combat scenarios was now coordinating food delivery in hurricane zones. That, more than anything, felt like redemption. The brass band started another march, and the sound carried through the crisp air. I glanced at the crowd again, faces smiling, flags waving, and realized how rare quiet victory really is. No headlines, no chaos. Just work that matters, continuing long after the noise fades. Leona texted from the command center. System updates stable. NATO integration complete. Enjoy the day, boss. I smiled faintly. There was something beautiful about knowing the machine ran perfectly, without me touching a single line of code. A child ran up to me, waving a miniature flag. Are you a soldier? He asked, eyes wide. Used to be, I said. What are you now? I thought for a moment, someone who builds things that help soldiers. He grinned and ran back to his parents. Simple questions, honest answers. Grant nodded toward the cadets marching past. They remind you of anything? Yeah, I said. They still march straighter than I ever did. He laughed. That's debatable. A jet formation thundered overhead, contrails slicing across the blue. The sound vibrated through my chest, sharp and alive. Everyone looked up. For a moment, the city fell perfectly still, united in a single collective awe. That was the thing about parades, they weren't really about celebration. They were about continuity, proof that even after loss, betrayal, or scandal, the rhythm doesn't stop. Someone always keeps marching. As the last float passed, I started walking down a quieter side street, away from the crowd. No cameras followed. No one called my name. It was exactly the kind of exit I'd earned unremarkable, intact, and private. Halfway down the block, Dean caught up. You leaving already? Yeah. I've got a meeting with the Defense Council later. On a Saturday? I shrugged. Security doesn't take weekends off. He shook his head. You really don't stop, do you? I tried once, I said. Didn't like who I became. We walked together for a while until he peeled off toward his car. Before he left, he looked back and said, You know, I was wrong about one thing. You didn't just rebuild from ashes. You built something fireproof. I didn't answer, just gave a small nod. Some words don't need replies. By the time I reached the riverfront, the parade noise had faded into distant music. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun, steady and indifferent to everything built beside it. I stood there for a long moment, hands in my pockets, watching the ripples shift with the wind. The city behind me was loud, proud, chaotic, everything it always had been. But standing there, I felt the kind of stillness that only comes when you've finished a war without starting a new one. Somewhere out there, people would still tell the story. The sister who was mocked, betrayed, and rose again. They'd call it revenge, because that's the word audiences like. But it was never about revenge. It was about rebuilding, about dignity surviving in the wreckage. A small group of veterans passed by on the path, laughing softly among themselves. One of them tipped his cap as they walked past. I nodded back. When the wind picked up, I could hear faint music from the parade drifting over the water trumpets, drums, the echo of a city celebrating itself. I turned away from it, walking toward the long stretch of road ahead. The kind of road that doesn't lead to glory, just purpose. The medals, the contracts, the recognition, they were noise. What mattered was that the system worked, the people under it were protected, and the name I carried no longer belonged to anyone else. Somewhere behind me, a flag snapped in the wind, bright against the afternoon. Sunday, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The mission was still moving forward. And for the first time in years, so was I.